My wife said stop checking my phone, so her tablet spoke in. I'm a 54-year-old man named Michael Harper, and before you judge me, let me say this plainly, the way a man does when he has nothing left to hide. I was never the jealous type. I was not the guy who hovered, who checked call logs, who asked who liked which post, or why a message came in at midnight. I grew up believing that trust was the backbone of any real marriage, not something fragile you guarded every second, but something strong enough to stand on its own. Trust to me was like breathing. You did not think about it. You did not count it. You just lived it. And for more than 27 years, I truly believed my wife and I had built something solid. Not perfect, not storybook, but solid in the way real life is solid. We raised 2 kids from diapers to adulthood. We argued about money, about paint colors, about which college made sense. We buried parents, survived layoffs, sat in emergency rooms, and still came home to the same bed at the end of the night. That kind of shared history does something to a man. It makes you feel untouchable. It makes you believe that whatever storms are out there, your house is anchored. Looking back now, I realize that sense of safety made me blind. Too safe is a dangerous place to live. The night everything changed did not feel dramatic at first. There was no thunder outside, no shouting, no slammed doors. It was just a regular evening, the kind that blends into every other night when you have been married long enough. Dinner dishes were still in the sink. The television murmured in the background. I remember standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching my wife scroll on her phone. She smiled at something on the screen, a small private smile that did not include me. I made a casual comment, nothing sharp, nothing serious, something like must be funny whatever you are reading. That is when she looked up at me, not surprised, not amused. She looked straight into my eyes and said, "Stop checking my phone, Michael." The words themselves were simple, almost harmless, but the way they landed felt heavy. Her voice did not shake, her face did not soften, and the way she held that phone tight against her chest was the way someone holds something they are afraid of losing. In that moment, the phone stopped being a phone. It became a locked door, and I was being told clearly that I was not allowed to stand on the other side of it. I remember the silence that followed more than the words themselves. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of the light overhead, the normal sounds of a house that had no idea what was happening inside it. A thought crossed my mind, slow and uncomfortable. Since when does a husband need permission to look at the same screen that once showed pictures of our kids, vacations, and dumb memes we laughed at together? The thought scared me, so I pushed it away. I laughed it off like an idiot, trying to keep things light, trying to be the reasonable one. I said something stupid like, "All right, fair enough, no worries, mate." I even smiled. But inside me something cracked, not loudly, not all at once. Just a small, quiet crack, the kind you barely notice because life has trained you to keep going, to keep the peace, to not rock the boat. Men my age are good at that. We have spent decades swallowing discomfort and calling it maturity. After that night, I told myself it was nothing. Everyone deserves privacy. Phones are personal now. Times have changed. I repeated those lines in my head like a script, because admitting the truth felt too risky. Admitting that something was wrong meant admitting that everything I trusted might not be as solid as I thought. And that is a terrifying thing for a man who has built his entire identity around being a husband, a father, a provider. I went to bed that night next to her, listening to her breathe, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was overthinking. But my body did not believe the lie. My chest felt tight. My stomach felt heavy. It was the kind of feeling you get when your mind is still arguing but your gut has already decided. What I did not know then was that her phone was never going to be the thing that exposed her. That phone was guarded, protected, always within reach. The real truth was sitting quietly somewhere else, forgotten, ignored, underestimated. It was her tablet, an old one. The dusty thing shoved into a drawer years ago. A birthday gift I bought back when we shared passwords without thinking, when we passed devices back and forth without fear, when there was nothing to hide. She once told me that tablet was dead, useless, slow, basically trash. I believed her because believing was easier than questioning. But that tablet was not dead. It was waiting. I did not wake up the next morning planning to uncover anything. There was no grand decision, no dramatic resolve. Life simply nudged me in that direction. A few days later, during a boring afternoon when the house felt too quiet, I started cleaning out a junk drawer. Old chargers, expired coupons, instruction manuals for things we no longer owned. And there it was, the tablet. Cold, lifeless, covered in fingerprints from another time. I almost put it back. I really did. My hand hovered there, and for a second I considered closing the drawer and walking away. But something in me would not let it go. Not curiosity, not suspicion. Instinct. The kind you feel deep in your bones when something is off, even if you cannot explain why. I plugged it in, more out of habit than intention, and went to make coffee. When I came back, the screen was glowing. The tablet did not ask for a password. That alone made my heart start pounding. It opened like it recognized me, like it had been waiting all this time for someone to finally look. Notifications started popping up, one after another, like a flood breaking through a dam. Messages, emails, app alerts. Each one felt like a knock on a door I did not want to open. My hands started shaking, not because I knew what I would find, but because part of me already did. I sat down slowly, the way you do when your legs suddenly feel weak, and I started reading. At first my brain tried to protect me. Maybe it is work stuff. Maybe I am misreading. Maybe it is nothing. Then I saw his name. Mark. Not a coworker I recognized, not a friend we shared. Just a name that appeared too often, too familiar, too intimate. As I scrolled, time stopped meaning anything. Conversations stretched back months. Jokes that made her laugh in ways I had not heard in years. Compliments she never accepted from me anymore. Late-night messages sent when I was asleep beside her. Photos that were never meant for my eyes. Plans disguised as work trips. Meetings hidden behind errands. Every lie I had accepted without question suddenly lined up perfectly, like puzzle pieces snapping into place. I felt sick. Not just hurt, but small, replaceable, like a background character in my own marriage. The tablet did not shout. It did not accuse. It simply showed me the truth quietly, patiently, in black and white. And that made it worse. There was no room for denial, no space to argue with myself. The proof was calm, organized, undeniable. What hurt the most in that moment was not the physical betrayal I could already sense between the lines. It was the realization of how long this had been going on. How many dinners she sat across from me smiling while carrying someone else in her pocket. How many times she told me she was tired while staying awake to talk to him. How many versions of her existed that I had never been invited to know. I felt like a guest in my own life, someone who had missed the real story while living in the background noise. My chest burned. My eyes filled, but no tears fell. Shock has a way of freezing you like that. If you have ever felt your stomach drop for no clear reason, like your body knew the truth before your mind did, then you already understand what that moment felt like. It is the moment when the ground shifts, when the past rewrites itself in real time, when memories you once cherished suddenly feel contaminated. I sat there in the dim light, the tablet glowing in my hands, realizing that the life I thought I was living had been running on a lie. And the worst part was not that betrayal had happened. It was that it had happened quietly, politely, right under my roof. Because sometimes betrayal does not scream. Sometimes it does not come with drama or chaos. Sometimes it waits patiently on a screen, glowing softly in the dark, just waiting for you to touch it. And when you finally do, your whole damn life answers back. For most of my life, I honestly believed I was one of the lucky ones. I was not rich, not famous, not living some flashy dream, but I had what most men my age quietly hope for. I had a steady job that paid the bills. I had a decent house on a calm street where nothing dramatic ever happened. And most important, I had a wife I truly believed I knew better than anyone else on this planet. Her name was Linda. She was 52 back then, sharp when she wanted to be, warm when it mattered, the kind of woman who could cut through nonsense with one look but still hold your hand when life got heavy. We were not some picture-perfect couple, but we were real. And to me, real always mattered more than perfect. Our life had settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable, almost automatic. Mornings were quiet. We drank coffee without talking much, not because we were distant, but because we did not need words anymore. She liked her stronger than mine, always complained when I forgot that. Weekends meant grocery runs, arguing lightly over brands we both pretended mattered. Nights were for Netflix, the same couch, the same spot, her feet tucked under my leg like they had been for years. Sometimes she would fall asleep halfway through an episode, and I would let it keep playing just to avoid waking her. These little things felt like proof that we were still connected, even if life had slowed us down. From the outside, we probably looked like every other long-married American couple just trying to make it through the years. Neighbors waved. Friends joked that we had made it. Our kids were grown and mostly out of the house, building their own lives. There was pride in that. We had survived the hard parts, the sleepless nights, the money scares, the chaos of raising children. We had earned this quieter chapter. Sure, things were different now. Passion had softened into comfort. Long talks about the future turned into short updates about the day. Dreams became schedules, but I never saw that as danger. I saw it as stability. I thought this was what winning looked like. What I did not understand then was how slow change can be, how betrayal rarely arrives like a storm. It arrives like dust, settling so lightly you do not notice it until the room feels different. Linda did not wake up one day and become someone else. She changed in inches, not miles. Tiny things that felt harmless at first. She started guarding her phone the way people guard their wallet or keys, always aware of where it was, always face down on the table. She smiled at messages more often, but when I asked what was funny, she would shrug and say something vague, like just a stupid thing online. I accepted that answer because it was easier than pushing. She started taking her phone with her everywhere, even to rooms she never used to bring it into. I noticed, but I told myself I was imagining things. Then there were the showers. She began taking them later at night, long after I had settled in. She said it helped her sleep, helped her relax. I nodded because that sounded reasonable. Everything sounded reasonable if you wanted it to. That is the dangerous part. I blamed stress from work. I blamed age. I blamed the empty nest. I even blamed myself. I told myself maybe I had become boring, predictable, too quiet. Maybe this was just how marriage looked after 25 years. Men like me are taught to think that way. We are taught that questioning too much makes us weak, that being calm and understanding makes us good husbands. So I swallowed every strange feeling that rose up inside me and pushed it back down. There were moments, small ones, when my gut tried to speak up. A pause before she answered a question, a laugh that felt a second too late, a sense that she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to me. But I ignored those moments. I told myself I was overthinking. I reminded myself of our history, of everything we had been through together. I told myself no one throws away decades of a life for something stupid. I trusted the version of her I had known for most of my adult life, not realizing that the version I trusted was slowly being replaced by someone I did not recognize. Looking back now, I see how much effort I put into keeping the peace. I avoided arguments. I avoided uncomfortable conversations. I chose silence because it felt like maturity. I thought I was protecting our marriage by not pushing, by not questioning, by letting things slide. But while I was busy holding everything together on the surface, something underneath was changing shape. My marriage was not breaking loudly. It was being rewritten quietly, line by line, right in front of me. And I did not see it, because I was too busy believing that what I had was real, solid, and unshakable. First real argument between us did not come with shouting or slammed doors. It did not arrive like a sudden explosion that left wreckage everywhere. It crept in quietly and sat between us, heavy and uncomfortable, like smoke that fills a room before anyone notices the fire. It started with something so small that, under normal circumstances, it would not have mattered at all. One night, long after we should have both been asleep, I noticed the soft glow of her phone lighting up the bedroom. I did not say anything right away. I just watched the light flicker against the wall, watched her turn slightly away from me as she typed. When she finally set the phone down, I asked, as casually as I could, who she had been texting so late. There was no accusation in my voice, no edge, just curiosity, the kind that comes naturally when two people share a life. She froze for half a second. It was so brief that she probably thought I would not notice, but I did. In that tiny pause, something shifted. Then she laughed, a quick forced laugh like I had just told a bad joke or said something ridiculous. She looked at me and said, "You're acting weird lately, Michael." That sentence hit me harder than it should have. It landed in my chest like a quiet accusation. Somehow, in just a few words, the focus flipped. The question I asked disappeared, and I became the problem for asking it. I remember feeling confused more than anything. Since when does curiosity turn into weirdness? Since when does a simple question feel like crossing a line? After that night, things changed in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Every question I asked, no matter how gentle, seemed to carry weight in her eyes. If I asked why she was late coming home, I was suddenly controlling. If I asked why she changed her phone password, I was insecure. If I asked who she was meeting for lunch, I was prying. The tone of our conversations shifted. There was tension where there used to be ease. The air between us felt tight, like we were both holding our breath but for different reasons. I started choosing my words carefully, rehearsing questions in my head before saying them out loud, and often deciding not to ask at all. The word trust began to appear more and more in our language, but not in the way it used to. It was no longer something we shared. It became something she used like a shield. She would look at me and say, "If you trust me, you wouldn't need to ask." That line messes with your head in a way that is hard to explain unless you have lived it. It makes you feel ashamed for wanting clarity. It turns your natural instincts against you. You start questioning your own judgment, wondering if you really are being unreasonable, if you really are seeing things that are not there. I found myself apologizing for things I did not understand just to keep the peace. As the weeks passed, I felt myself shrinking inside my own home. Conversations became shorter. Eye contact became rarer. There was a distance growing between us that no amount of shared space could close. I remember one night sitting alone in the garage, the door half open, staring at a stack of old boxes I never bothered to unpack. The house was quiet, too quiet. I sat there longer than I needed to, not because I was doing anything important, but because the garage felt less lonely than the living room. I kept asking myself how a man ends up feeling like a stranger in the house he helped build. How you can share a bed with someone and still feel completely shut out. It was during that time that she finally said the words that drew the line for good. We were in the kitchen, the same place where so many ordinary moments had happened over the years. I had picked up her phone absent-mindedly, not to check anything, just to move it out of the way. She snapped. Her reaction was fast and sharp, completely out of proportion to the moment. She took the phone from my hand and said, "Stop checking my phone." Her voice was firm, final, like a rule being laid down. That was the moment I knew a boundary had been crossed, or rather, erected. An invisible wall went up between us right there, and I could feel it. Once that wall existed, there was no pretending it was not there. Because people do not build walls unless there is something on the other side worth hiding. The tablet had been sitting in that drawer for so long that it had practically become invisible. It was one of those things you stop seeing because it belongs to another time, another version of your life. I remembered buying it for her years ago, a birthday gift back when we still shared passwords without thinking, back when playlists were something we built together instead of something private. Back then, devices were just tools. They were not vaults. They were not secrets. That tablet had once been part of our everyday life, used for recipes, photos, silly games, and video calls with the kids. Then newer phones came along, faster laptops, and slowly, without ceremony, the tablet was shoved into a drawer and forgotten. Or at least I thought it was forgotten. The day I found it was ordinary in every way. Rain tapped against the windows, steady and dull. The power flickered once, then twice, before the Wi-Fi finally went out. No television, no internet, nothing to distract me. Linda was out, said she had errands to run, and the house felt unusually quiet. That kind of quiet makes you restless. You start looking for something to do just to fill the time. I decided to clean out the junk drawer in the kitchen, the one we kept saying we would organize someday. It was full of dead batteries, tangled cords, old instruction manuals, take-out menus from places that probably did not even exist anymore. And there it was, buried under all of it. The tablet. Cold. Lifeless. A thin layer of dust on the screen like proof of how long it had been ignored. I picked it up without thinking much about it. It felt heavier than I remembered, maybe because of what it was about to carry. I wiped the screen with my sleeve and saw my own reflection staring back at me, older than the man who bought it. I remember thinking it was probably useless by now, slow, outdated, forgotten for a reason. I almost put it back in the drawer. I even slid it halfway under the pile of junk before stopping. Something held me there. It was not suspicion, at least not the kind people talk about. It was not a clear thought or a plan. It was instinct. The kind that rises up quietly and says, just check, just see. I plugged it into a charger and set it on the counter, telling myself I was only curious if it even worked anymore. While it charged, I tried to distract myself. I made coffee. I stood by the window watching the rain blur the street outside, but my eyes kept drifting back to the counter, to that small screen slowly coming back to life. When it finally powered on, the glow felt too bright in the dim kitchen. My heart started beating faster for no reason I could explain. I expected it to ask for a password. That would have been normal. That would have given me time to stop, to tell myself this was none of my business. But it did not. The home screen appeared instantly, familiar and strange at the same time, like walking into a room you used to live in but had not visited in years. Then the notifications started coming in, one after another. The sound was soft, but each alert felt loud in my chest. Messages, emails, app notifications. It was like watching a dam break in slow motion. I stood there frozen, my coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at a flood of information that clearly did not belong to the past. This tablet was not dead. It was active, alive, used, and somehow forgot, or maybe just assumed safe. My hands started shaking as I picked it up and sat down at the table. I told myself I could stop at any moment. I told myself I did not have to look. But the truth is, once that screen lights up like that, curiosity turns into gravity. I opened the first message, then another, then another. The words on the screen did not make sense at first, not because they were unclear, but because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. Conversations stretched back weeks, then months. They were not casual, they were not harmless. They were intimate in a way that made my throat tight. There were jokes that only people close to each other share, compliments that carried weight, good morning messages, good night messages, plans hidden between the lines. And then I saw his name, Mark. It jumped out at me like a bruise you suddenly notice. Not a coworker I recognized, not a family friend. Just a name that appeared too often, too comfortably, too deeply woven into her daily life. As I scrolled, the picture became clearer and more brutal. This was not a few messages here and there. This was a parallel relationship. A whole second life running quietly alongside the one I thought we shared. There were photos she never showed me. Selfies taken at angles I had not seen in years. Messages sent late at night, at times when she told me she was tired or already asleep. There were references to trips she said were work conferences, little details that lined up with dates I remembered clearly. Nights she claimed she fell asleep early, nights I watched television alone, thinking nothing of it. Every lie I had accepted without question suddenly had a place to sit. Everything fit too perfectly. I felt sick, not just hurt but hollow. My chest felt tight, like there was not enough air in the room. I had to put the tablet down at one point because my hands would not stop trembling. I remember pressing my palms flat against the table, trying to steady myself, trying to slow my breathing. My mind raced ahead, replaying moments from the past few months with new understanding. Her smiles, her absences, her defensiveness. It all made sense now, and that was the cruelest part. The truth did not feel chaotic. It felt organized, planned, intentional. The tablet did not scream accusations at me. It did not shout betrayal in dramatic fashion. It whispered. It showed me the truth in calm, glowing light, line by line, message by message. There was no room for misinterpretation, no way to explain it away. This was not something I could argue with or rationalize. This was evidence of a life I was never meant to know about, preserved quietly on a device she assumed would never be touched again. I realized then how dangerous assumptions are. How easy it is to forget the things we think no longer matter. That tablet had become a silent witness, watching everything, recording everything, waiting. What hurt the most was not even the realization that she was involved with another man. It was seeing how familiar he was to her. The way she spoke to him sounded like the way she used to speak to me. The warmth, the openness, the excitement. It was like watching a version of my marriage play out with someone else in my place. I felt replaced before I was even gone. That thought dug deep. It made me question my worth, my role, my entire place in the life I thought I was living. Time stopped meaning anything as I kept scrolling. Minutes blurred into hours. The rain outside kept falling, steady and indifferent, while my world quietly collapsed at a kitchen table. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so life-changing could happen without noise, without witnesses, without anyone else in the house knowing. Just me and a screen, glowing softly, telling me everything I had been afraid to hear. And once you see something like that, once the truth settles into your bones, you cannot unsee it. You cannot go back to not knowing. The tablet had spoken, and nothing in my life would ever sound the same again. What hurt me the most was not the physical part of the affair. I know that is what people expect to be the worst part. The idea of another man touching your wife, being close to her in ways that were once yours alone. But that was not the wound that cut the deepest. The real pain came from understanding that I had been emotionally replaced long before anything physical ever mattered. Reading those messages on the tablet showed me a version of my wife I had not seen in years. She shared her thoughts with him, her frustrations, her small daily moments. She told him things she never told me anymore. She laughed with him in a way that sounded light and free, a laugh I realized I had not heard directed at me in a very long time. That realization sat heavy in my chest because it meant I had not just lost her body, I had lost her presence. As I kept replaying the messages in my head, memories from my own life started reshaping themselves. Moments that once felt ordinary suddenly took on new meaning. I thought about the time she came home smiling for no clear reason, brushing past me with a quick kiss before heading to the shower. I thought about nights when she seemed distracted at dinner, tapping her phone just out of habit, or maybe not habit at all. I realized how many of those smiles were never meant for me. They were echoes of conversations she had already had with someone else. That understanding hurt more than any image my mind could create. It made me feel like an extra in my own marriage, present but not truly seen. That evening when she finally came home, I felt like I was watching a stranger walk through the door wearing my wife's face. Every movement felt rehearsed. Every word felt measured. I watched her the way an actor studies another actor on stage, looking for cracks in the performance. She set her keys down in the same place she always did. She asked how my day was, her voice steady and familiar. She kissed my cheek in passing, a quick, casual gesture that once meant comfort but now felt hollow. I wondered how many times she had done that after texting him, how many times she had walked into our home, carrying someone else in her thoughts. We sat down for dinner and she ate like nothing had happened. She talked about her errands, about traffic, about things that did not matter. I nodded, responded when expected, played my role just as well as she played hers. Inside, everything felt unreal. I was sitting across from a woman who had spent months building a separate emotional world, and she was acting like our life was untouched. That was the moment my marriage officially died. Not with shouting, not with tears, not with dramatic confessions or slammed doors. It died quietly, at a dinner table under normal lighting, during a conversation that meant nothing. I realized then that I was living with someone who could lie to my face without flinching. Not just small lies, but lies big enough to reshape a life. She looked comfortable doing it. practiced even. That realization changed the way I saw her, and it changed the way I saw myself. It stripped away the last bit of innocence I had left about our relationship. I understood that the woman I loved was capable of compartmentalizing her life in a way I never could. She could move between worlds without carrying the weight. I carried all of it. That kind of betrayal does something permanent to a man. It hardens a place inside you that used to be soft. It makes you cautious where you were once open. I felt anger, yes, but it was a quiet anger, the kind that burned slow and steady. I felt sadness, but even that took a back seat to something else. Clarity. For the first time in weeks, my confusion disappeared. I was no longer guessing or doubting myself. I knew exactly what was happening, and knowing gave me something important back. Control. I did not confront her that night. I did not raise my voice or demand explanations. I did not throw the tablet on the table and ask her to explain herself. Not because I was weak, but because I was thinking clearly. Anger would have given her power. A confrontation in that moment would have been about emotion, not truth. I needed time. I needed to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with. I needed more than proof. I needed perspective. So I sat there, ate my dinner, and listened to her talk, all while knowing that the woman across from me was no longer the partner I thought I had. That was the night I stopped being just a hurt husband and started becoming someone who was paying attention. After that night, something inside me settled into a strange, unnatural calm. The anger did not disappear and the hurt did not fade, but they stopped running the show. Instead, a cold clarity took over. I realized very quickly that reacting would only cost me. Exploding would feel good for a few seconds, but it would give her control of the story. I refused to hand that over, so I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I acted normal. I smiled when she smiled. I nodded when she talked. I played my part so well that even I almost believed it sometimes. On the outside, nothing changed. On the inside, I was building something quiet, careful, and precise. Every morning, I went through the same routine. Coffee, news, work. I asked about her day. I listened like a husband should. I laughed at the right moments. I became invisible in the best possible way. Silence became my shield. She grew comfortable again, relaxed, convinced that whatever tension had existed was gone, and comfort makes people careless. While she lived in that comfort, I paid attention, not in a frantic way, not with obsession, but with focus. I started noticing patterns. Times she always checked her phone. Days she suddenly had plans. Excuses that repeated themselves with different words. I did not accuse, I observed. I documented everything, quietly, methodically, screenshots taken when she left the room, dates written down in a small notebook I kept hidden in the garage, times when money moved in ways that did not match our usual habits, hotel charges buried inside generic email receipts, travel confirmations disguised as work-related bookings. I was not looking for pain anymore. I already had that. I was looking for truth in its full shape, and the more I found, the calmer I became. Knowledge replaced confusion. Evidence replaced doubt. What shocked me most during those weeks was how much I learned about my wife. Not the version I thought I knew, but the version she became when she thought no one was watching. I saw how easily she compartmentalized her life, how she could move between roles without hesitation. Wife, partner, someone else's secret. At the same time, I learned things about myself that surprised me. I learned that patience is not weakness. I learned that restraint is a form of strength. I learned that revenge does not need noise to be effective. Sometimes the strongest move is letting someone believe they are winning, while you quietly secure the ground beneath your feet. During that time, I consulted a lawyer. I did it carefully, quietly, during lunch breaks and early mornings. I asked questions I never thought I would need to ask, about assets, about accounts, about options, about what protection looked like for a man my age who had spent decades building a life with someone else. I listened more than I spoke. I took notes. I made decisions. I protected my finances. I separated what needed to be separated. I made sure no surprise could destroy what I had worked my entire life to build. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had slowly handed over through years of trust. At home, nothing changed on the surface. We still shared meals, we still slept in the same bed. Sometimes she reached for my hand and I let her, not because I felt close but because I understood the value of timing. I was no longer acting out of emotion, I was acting with purpose. The confusion that once clouded my thoughts was gone. In its place was preparation. Calm, deliberate, unshakable. I was not planning chaos, I was planning survival. And for the first time since the truth revealed itself, I felt something close to dignity returning. The morning of the confrontation arrived like any other Sunday, calm and ordinary, yet it carried the weight of months of quiet calculation. I woke up earlier than usual, the house silent except for the occasional creak of settling floorboards and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Linda was still asleep, her breath steady, untroubled, completely unaware of what was coming. For weeks, I had imagined this moment countless times, each scenario more dramatic than the last. I had envisioned arguments, yelling, slamming doors, maybe even crying. But when the day came, I realized that none of that mattered. I did not need spectacle. I did not need noise. What I needed was clarity, precision, and justice delivered with a calm hand, not a shaking one. I prepared myself like a man walking into a courtroom. My suit was neat, my voice steady, my presence measured. And there on the kitchen table I placed the tablet, not carelessly, not like I was trying to threaten or intimidate. I placed it deliberately, like an object of truth, like a silent witness now taking center stage. I watched her stir awake, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the blinds, and saw that subtle shift in her posture that I had come to know well, the brief tightening of muscles, the small pause before recognition. And then she saw it. Her face went pale, the color draining almost instantly. I saw the tension in her shoulders, the tiny hitch in her breath. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her hands hovered uncertain, trembling slightly, and in that pause I understood the magnitude of what she was feeling. This was the first time in months, or maybe years, that she had no control over the narrative. For once, she was forced to confront the truth in front of her, a truth she had hoped would remain hidden forever. I did not raise my voice. I did not storm forward. I did not need to. The tablet had already spoken louder than I ever could. I leaned back slightly, my hands resting calmly on the edge of the table, and said, "I know everything, not some things, everything." The words were simple, almost understated, but they landed heavier than any scream. It was not a threat. It was a statement. The quiet authority in my voice filled the room, leaving no space for denial, no room for excuses to hide. The walls seemed to close in. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken confessions. She tried to respond, to form some sentence, some defense, but the words dissolved in her throat. I saw the fear, the regret, the recognition. It was all there in her eyes. The carefully constructed world she had built, the lies, the deceit, the emotional double life, collapsed instantly. No argument, no yelling, no confrontation could have done what simply presenting the truth did. The facade fell in a heartbeat. And then the tears came. Quiet at first, hesitant, rolling down her cheeks without any dramatic sound. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to shift blame. "I felt lonely," she said. "I felt unseen. I was bored. I didn't know how to tell you." I listened, calm, my expression neutral, my body relaxed, but my mind alert. Every word she spoke was another piece of the puzzle, a confirmation of everything I had already known. A revelation of the gaps I had never seen. It was strange how the room could be so quiet and so loud at the same time. Each confession hit like a wave, but I did not flinch. I had spent weeks preparing for this. I had spent months learning to control my emotions, to observe without reacting. I had spent countless hours documenting, analyzing, strategizing. And now, when the truth finally entered the room, I could receive it without being consumed. And then for the first time I spoke words that shocked even me. I said, "I believe you." Her head shot up, eyes wide with disbelief. I believe you," I repeated slowly, deliberately. "I believe you felt lonely. I believe you felt unseen. I believe that boredom drove you into someone else's arms, but belief does not erase consequences." The sentence hung in the air, heavy, precise, final. It was not angry. It was not vengeful, it was surgical. The clarity of it cut through the tension more effectively than any shouting match ever could. And in that moment I realized something crucial. The marriage had ended. Not with screaming, not with threats, not with tears or slamming doors. It ended with a calm acknowledgement of truth and responsibility, delivered in a way that no one could misunderstand. She looked at me, her eyes searching for anger, for vengeance, for chaos, and found none. Instead, she found measured strength, a man who had survived betrayal not by fighting, but by mastering himself. I saw a flicker of fear, of awe, of perhaps understanding, pass across her face. She realized in that moment that the games were over, that the lies no longer held power, that the stage she had performed on for months was now empty. I did not berate her. I did not demand apologies. I did not try to rewrite the past. I simply sat there, the tablet between us, the evidence undeniable, the truth as clean and clear as daylight. That calmness, that ability to hold myself together while the world around me seemed to tremble, was more powerful than any revenge I had imagined. It was a demonstration of control, of dignity, of reclaiming my life from the hands of deceit. Time slowed in that kitchen. Minutes stretched into something almost infinite. We did not need to speak for the weight of the moment to be understood. Every glance, every hesitation, every tear told the story of what had been and what could never be again. And in that silence, a profound realization settled over me. The battle was over, not because one side had won and the other had lost, but because truth, when presented with precision and calm, has a finality that chaos never achieves. That morning marked the end of an era, a clean, brutal, undeniable end. The confrontation did not rely on shouting, dramatic gestures, or public humiliation. It relied on truth, patience, and the courage to remain composed when the world inside your home is falling apart. And as she finally sat back, exhausted and silent, I felt a clarity I had not felt in months. A sense that, for the first time since discovering the betrayal, the chaos was behind me. The marriage had ended, but I was still standing, still calm, still in control. And in that calm, I found the first spark of freedom. The weeks after the confrontation were surreal in their quiet devastation. Mark, the man who had woven himself into my wife's life like a shadow I never saw, disappeared almost immediately. It was as if reality had finally reached through the fantasy she had been living, pulling him out like a magician ending a trick. Affairs, I realized with bitter clarity, do not survive daylight. They thrive in the hidden hours, the stolen moments, the whispered messages sent in the dark. The minute the truth was visible, accountability arrived like a tide, washing everything away. And Mark, predictably, had no interest in staying to face it. He left, or at least withdrew, retreating into whatever imagined world had allowed him to participate in a life that was never truly his. Linda, however, did not disappear. She had to stay. She had to live in the aftermath of her choices, and that was where the weight hit her hardest. The illusion of control she had nurtured for months, the careful management of appearances, the belief that she could maintain both worlds without consequence, all of it crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. Suddenly, she was left with more than guilt. She was left with exposure, the cold glare of accountability shining into corners she had thought were hidden forever. She lost more than me, more than the partnership that had been her safety net for decades. She lost respect, both from me and from others. People who had known her, friends, family, colleagues, the very network she had once considered untouchable, saw cracks in the mask. The world she had imagined herself master of no longer recognized her. Calls she had ignored or redirected suddenly became questions. Invitations she had taken for granted now carried judgment. Subtle glances from neighbors, friends, even distant acquaintances reminded her that the version of herself she had relied on so heavily had shifted dramatically, irrevocably. Stability, too, vanished. Our home, once a haven of predictable routines and comfort, became a theater of consequences. Rooms she had wandered through casually now felt heavy with my observation and presence, or when I was away, with the echo of what had been revealed. Finances, carefully managed, had been quietly separated under my counsel. Legal advice had ensured that her options were constrained, that every move she might make was measured against the boundaries I had set in place long before she realized. She was no longer living in the fantasy of control. She was living in the real world, and it was harsher than anything she had imagined. The story she told herself, the narrative that had allowed her to justify every small deception, every flirtatious message, every unaccounted for night, collapsed completely. There was no one left to perform for, no one to deceive. I did not shout, I did not demand, I simply existed in my quiet preparation, and that was enough to make her illusions meaningless. There was no argument I could have made that would have held the same power as evidence, patience, and calm observation. She was left with herself, facing consequences she had not thought possible. I moved out on my own terms, not in shame, not in anger, not in a last-ditch act of theatrical closure. I had prepared. I had acted deliberately. Every step from documenting evidence to consulting lawyers to observing without confrontation led to this moment. I packed my belongings methodically, each item a symbol of a life I was reclaiming, not a reminder of loss. I left the house with a sense of control, a rare gift after months of chaos, betrayal, and quiet suffering. Leaving did not feel like defeat. It felt like liberation. For the first time in years, I was stepping into my own life, unburdened by lies that were not mine, unshackled from a trust that had been broken beyond repair. And the nights that followed were the first in decades that I truly slept. Not the shallow, restless sleep of a man carrying unseen weight. Not the fractured, interrupted sleep where dreams were haunted by suspicion and doubt. For the first time in years, I slept deeply, with the quiet knowledge that I had acted with purpose, that my integrity had remained intact, but the chaos left behind was not mine to carry. The betrayal had been catastrophic, yes, but in the wreckage, I discovered a rare clarity. I learned that peace is not about controlling others. It is about reclaiming control over yourself, over your actions, over your choices. Linda, on the other hand, was left to navigate the ruin she had built around herself. I saw the subtle signs in the months that followed, the hesitation in her voice when speaking to mutual friends, the nervous glances when familiar faces approached, the careful, almost rigid attempts to maintain a normal exterior. The consequences of betrayal are not always loud. They do not always come with confrontation or scandal. Sometimes the punishment is quieter, slower, more inexorable. It is the realization that the life you thought you could manipulate no longer bends to your will. That is what she faced every day. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. I found a rhythm in solitude that had been absent for decades. I took long walks, noticing details in the world I had ignored while trapped in the haze of betrayal and disbelief. I read, I wrote. I reconnected with old friends and colleagues whose relationships had been deprioritized during the years of assumed stability. Each action was deliberate, a reclamation of time and energy she had taken for granted. And in that slow, quiet process, I discovered a strength I had never expected, a resilience born not from avoiding pain, but from facing it and using it as fuel to reconstruct a life that was honest, unshakable, and mine alone. Looking back, I realized that the fall was never about revenge in the dramatic sense. It was about consequences, about allowing reality to enter a world that had been carefully curated to hide the truth. Affairs thrive on fantasy, on selective perception, on moments hidden from scrutiny. Once the scrutiny arrives, once the truth is allowed to exist in full light, the fantasy evaporates. Mark vanished because he had no stake in reality. Linda remained, confronted by the weight of her own decisions, the wreckage of trust, the collapse of narrative she had relied on to make herself comfortable. And I walked away, stronger, steadier, and finally at peace with the knowledge that betrayal, no matter how deeply hidden, always carries a price. Starting over at 54 is not easy. That is not an exaggeration or a cliché. It is the simple, unvarnished truth. At that age, most people expect stability, comfort, a sense of belonging that has been carefully built over decades. I had all of that, or at least I had thought I did, until betrayal ripped it away in quiet, relentless waves. What remained after everything fell apart was raw, unfiltered reality. The house was mine no longer. The routines I had known and depended upon were gone. And the woman I had trusted more than anyone else in the world had become a stranger overnight. It was a hollow kind of emptiness, the kind that stretches wide and cold across your chest, pressing against your ribs and demanding attention. Yet in that emptiness I found something unexpected. I found clarity. I found a strange, quiet power in the act of surviving, in the act of continuing when every part of you wants to collapse. Rebuilding a life after betrayal is nothing like the movies. There are no sudden epiphanies or instant victories. There are no magical moments when everything suddenly makes sense. It is painstaking, quiet, methodical. I discovered, painfully and deliberately, how strong silence can be. Silence is a weapon, yes, but it is also a shield. It protects you from impulsive decisions, from emotional reactions that could undo months of careful preparation. I learned that self-respect is louder than anger, that walking away calmly, with dignity intact, says more about your strength than any confrontation ever could. I started small. I focused on routines that reminded me of who I was outside the confines of a marriage that had betrayed me. I woke up when I wanted, brewed coffee exactly how I liked it, walked the streets near my home in the early morning when the world was quiet. I made small promises to myself. I would read more, I would write, I would reconnect with friends I had neglected. Every action was deliberate. Every step was a tiny victory against the feeling of powerlessness that betrayal had planted inside me. Slowly, deliberately, the contours of my new life began to emerge. Confidence did not return overnight. Some mornings I still woke with the weight of what had been lost pressing on my chest. Memories would creep in, the laugh she shared with someone else, the private jokes I had never been part of. I would feel anger, yes, but I learned to observe it rather than act on it. I learned to measure my reactions, to hold them in my chest, and let them cool before allowing them to influence my choices. That restraint became the foundation for rebuilding. Each day that I could wake up without lashing out, each day I could take a breath and act deliberately, felt like a brick in the house of the man I was becoming. In time, the sense of being discarded began to fade. I realized that betrayal is never about your worth. It is about someone else's failure to recognize the value in what they have. I stopped seeing myself as a victim. I stopped framing my life around what she had done or what she had taken from me. Instead, I began to see myself as freed, unburdened by the lies, the deceit, the performances I had once tolerated. There was a peculiar beauty in that freedom. It was a freedom born not from victory, not from revenge, not from vindication, but from honesty and self-awareness. I could finally breathe without the weight of pretense pressing against me. Rebuilding also required redefining relationships. I leaned into friends who had remained steady, who had not taken sides, who had simply been there when life became complicated. I mended the gaps I had let grow in the years of routine, checking in with old colleagues, attending gatherings I had avoided, reconnecting with family members whose presence reminded me that life extends beyond the walls of betrayal. I allowed myself to laugh again, to enjoy small pleasures that had been dulled by months of quiet torment. I even allowed myself to date again, cautiously at first, understanding that this chapter of my life would be guided by wisdom, not by the naive trust I once gave too freely. Every morning as I brewed my coffee and walked past the streets I had once strolled with her, I felt the subtle shift in perspective. The man who had once been blindsided by deceit was still present. The man who had once questioned himself, who had doubted his worth, was slowly solidifying into someone who understood his value. Betrayal had not ended me. It had refined me. It had forced me to confront the ugly truths of human behavior, to accept that some people cannot honor trust, and to recognize that my response, not their choices, determined the trajectory of my life. I rebuilt routines, simple ones at first, waking up early, journaling, walking, cooking meals that reminded me I could still nourish myself without compromise. I rebuilt confidence by reclaiming hobbies and skills I had shelved, by volunteering my time, by learning things I had long ignored in favor of domestic tranquility that no longer existed. Every decision was a reaffirmation of self, a deliberate act of creation in a world that had, for so long, felt dictated by someone else's choices. I also rebuilt boundaries. The lessons of betrayal are harsh, but they are clear. Self-preservation is not selfish. I learned to say no without guilt, to remove myself from toxic dynamics, to insist on respect in every relationship I allowed to remain in my life. That process was slow and painful, because old habits die hard, especially when they are intertwined with decades of familiarity. But every boundary I set was a statement. I would not be deceived again. I would not tolerate manipulation. I would not allow the past to dictate my future. Perhaps the most profound realization came when I understood that life after betrayal is not about revenge, nor about punishing the other person. It is about reclaiming yourself. It is about understanding that your worth is not diminished by the actions of someone who chose another path. Betrayal, no matter how devastating, cannot erase the years of your own integrity, your kindness, your loyalty. What it can do, if you let it, is sharpen your understanding of human nature and reinforce your commitment to living authentically. In those quiet evenings, sitting with a cup of tea while the world outside grew dark, I would sometimes think back to the moments that had hurt me most, the whispered messages, the hidden trips, the laughter that was never mine. But instead of despair, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I had discovered the truth, gratitude that I had survived it, and gratitude that I had emerged with a sense of self that was stronger and more resilient than before. By the time months had passed, I was no longer the man defined by loss. I was a man who understood the weight of betrayal, who had navigated its storm with patience and strategy, and who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. I had learned that silence is powerful, that dignity is essential, and that freedom is found not in vengeance but in reclaiming the right to live honestly. Betrayal did not end me. It did not crush me. It refined me. It stripped away illusions, leaving behind a version of myself I had not fully known, but one I was proud to inhabit, a man unbroken, self-aware, and finally at peace. If there is one lesson that I have carved from this entire experience, one truth that has settled into my bones more deeply than anger, more indelibly than sorrow, it is this: trust should never require blindness, and love should never demand silence. That is the moral I want to leave, not as a lecture, not as judgment, but as a beacon for anyone who might find themselves standing where I once stood, in the quiet prelude to a revelation that would change everything. Trust in its purest form is about presence, not ignorance. It is about being seen and being valued for who you are, not about being coerced into pretending that the cracks do not exist, the signs do not appear, or the whispers do not reach your ears. For years, I believed that loyalty meant accepting my life as it appeared, never questioning, never prying. I told myself that peace was worth a certain degree of discomfort, that asking questions about small absences, late nights, subtle changes in behavior was petty or unnecessary. I ignored the little alarms in my gut because I thought experience had taught me restraint, because I thought that my love alone should be enough to keep my family intact. That, I realize now, was a lie I told myself to avoid the ugliness I had not yet been ready to face. Restraint without awareness is not wisdom, it is naivety. And naivety in the face of subtle betrayal is fertile ground for deception. Love should never demand that you silence your instincts. It should never require that you pretend the world is not shifting beneath your feet. When someone tells you to stop checking, stop asking, stop noticing, it is often not because your curiosity is intrusive or because you are overreacting. It is because the truth they are trying to hide is drawing closer. Because the weight of reality cannot withstand exposure indefinitely. Ignoring the small signals, pretending they do not exist, does not protect love. It protects a lie, and lies, when allowed to fester, are far more destructive than confrontation ever could be. In my case, The truth was hiding in a forgotten tablet, a dusty device shoved into a drawer, nearly invisible but alive with secrets. That tablet spoke louder than any conversation, louder than any denial, louder than any attempt at normalcy. Its glow revealed months of deception, the emotional intimacy she had reserved for another man, and the quiet replacement of my presence with someone else. That tiny, overlooked object became my catalyst, my window into the reality I had ignored because it was inconvenient, because it was uncomfortable, because I did not want to believe that my life could be rewritten without my knowledge. But the principle is universal. The truth in your life may not live on a tablet. It may reside in a glance you catch, in a message you overhear, and a routine that no longer aligns with the world you thought you had built. It may live in the subtle silence of someone who was once present, the whispered excuses that suddenly feel hollow, or in the moments where your instincts tell you that something is off. Listen to that whisper. Respect it. Investigate it without shame. Because when life begins to whisper, it is only a matter of time before it speaks loudly enough that ignoring it is impossible. The moral is not just about betrayal by others. It is about the responsibility you have to yourself. You cannot outsource awareness, you cannot delegate intuition, and you cannot ignore the warning signs of your own heart. Self-respect is measured not by how long you endure deception, but by how clearly you recognize when it has entered your life, how decisively you respond, and how deliberately you reclaim your agency. Silence in the face of small truths is often a prelude to catastrophe. Speaking, observing, verifying, these are not acts of mistrust, they are acts of preservation. I have learned that clarity does not come from emotion alone. It comes from observation, from patience, and from allowing yourself to act deliberately rather than reactively. I have learned that dignity is not dependent on being unhurt, and strength is not about avoiding pain. True strength is walking through betrayal, understanding it, and emerging intact, wiser, and prepared to construct a life that honors yourself rather than someone else's deceit. Ultimately, the truth is never truly hidden forever. It has a way of surfacing in one form or another, whether through a tablet, a message, a look, or an instinct that refuses to be ignored. Life, in its own patient and relentless way, will provide the evidence. And when it does, the way you respond, the way you hold yourself, and the way you honor your own understanding will determine the rest of your story. So if there is one lesson, one guiding principle I can leave for anyone listening to this story, it is this: do not silence yourself. Do not ignore the whispers that hint at reality. Pay attention to the little things because they are the first ripples of the truth. Trust should be given freely but not blindly. Love should be nurtured openly, but never at the expense of your own perception. And when the truth finally speaks, as it inevitably will, be ready to hear it, to act with clarity, and to reclaim your life with the dignity, patience, and strength that betrayal can never take from you. Because the life you deserve, the life built on honesty, self-respect, and awareness, is waiting beyond the shadows of deception. And no tablet, no lie, no betrayal, no matter how deep or long hidden, can prevent it from existing once you choose to see it, to acknowledge it, and to move forward. Listen when life whispers, learn when it teaches, and above all, never let silence or fear keep you from finding the truth that will ultimately set you free.